Our last speaker this afternoon is Mr. Ray Swalley, who now lives down near Lakewood with his wife Margie. During World War II, he was a Marine Corps fighter pilot with the Blue Devils on the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill. Lieutenant Swalley flew the Corsair, which became familiar to many of us baby boomers through the TV show Black Sheep Squadron, which was based on Marine Corps pilot Greg Pappy Boynton, who is also a graduate of the University of Washington. So, Mr. Swalley.
In 1922 is when I first started in aviation. That's 94 years ago. My mother and father went out to the barnstormer that was flying through at that time. This is in North Dakota. The dad wanted to do the loop-the-loop. If the pilot would do that, Dad said, we'll go up. So he agreed to do that. And so they got in the airplane up front here. And Dad was strapped in. My mother sat in his lap, and he held on to her. Now, when you get into a loop, you go up upside down at the top. Dad was so interested in the loop that he forgot to hold on to Mother. And he finally realized she was going out of the airplane, grabbed her legs, and saved her. Saved me, too, because I was born a few months later. That was my first experience with aviation. And then we moved out to far from North Dakota to Mapleton area to Tacoma. And I was always interested in aviation, and I went out to the local airfield. I was 15 years old and started flying. And I was noted for the youngest solo pilot in the area, and even got on the national news. Wound up with relatives back east calling and asking us about it. And okay, it works now.
Just tell me.
It works okay now. Then I had a private license, and I went up to Canada, signed up with the Canadian Air Force, waiting to be called, and the Pearl Harbor happened. They released me from there. I went out to the Army Air Corps, signed up with the Army Air Corps, waiting to be called again. When the Navy came along and said, we'll give you 2 years of college. I thought, that's great, right out of high school. So I signed up in the Navy. And I went, and a group of us left Seattle and went to Missoula for CPT training. This is my picture here in this group.
In Missoula.
And from Missoula, we went to E-base and so on, went to Corpus Christi, Texas, and graduated from Corpus Christi, got my wings, and I went into the Marine Corps because I didn't want to go aboard a carrier. They were sinking these carriers in the Pacific at that time. So I figured the Marines would never go aboard a carrier. When I finished flight school, I was scheduled to go out in a scout observation aircraft called the OS-2U Kingfisher. They catapulted off of battleships and cruisers. And while I was waiting to be shipped overseas, they said that we had enough Navy pilots, so they sent the Marines up to El Toro. Now, Marine Corps El Toro is in the Los Angeles area, and they wound up in dive bombers. I told the skipper of the dive bomber squadron, I said, I don't know why I'm here, I'm a float plane pilot. He said, well, there's a dive bomber out there, you go out and fly that a couple times, make a couple landings. Of course, in those days when you had the gold wings, you could fly anything. The crews, the mech on the field would show you where everything was in the cockpit, and off you'd go. I had some close calls in this. I don't want to go into it this time. Then on the dive bombers, they asked if there was anybody who wanted to go into fighters. I said, yes, I want to go into fighters. I had too many close calls in that dive bomber that I wanted out of it. So I wound up flying this Wildcat. It was one aircraft that they brought in from Guadalcanal. And it had bullet holes in it and everything. And 7 of us took off. 7 of us crash landed that airplane when we came in. And they were ground looping and so on, going up in the nose. And the skipper was at the end of the runway in a Jeep, and he was talking us in. And I was determined to make a good landing, and I did. I made a good landing. He was praised me, and I started going off, and I couldn't stop it. Went into the bushes. So he came storming out there to give me the blue, and I said, sir, look behind you. And he turned around and looked near the other pilot landing, and he was coming through the bushes right at us. We called this colonel Cussing Sam Moore. Every sentence has a cuss word, and that blue, it was terrible in the room where he was chewing out all the pilots ahead of me. I figured I'd better get out and check that airplane because I didn't think it had any brakes. And I went out the line, and the crew chief says, yes, you didn't have any brakes, but also you didn't have any tail wheel lock. So I went in and told the skipper, and he excused me and got out of that. Then I wound up out at Mojave. And we were in a squadron called the Blue Devils, formed at Mojave. That was quite a thrill when I went down the runway and pulled up and got my wheels up, and I was really traveling. I thought, boy, I'm the fastest thing on earth today. But we were flying close to, the airfield was close to Edwards Air Force Base. One day we were flying the squadron, and somebody said, there's a plane on fire down below. The smoke is coming out of it. So we dove down to see it, and we started coming up close to it. It pulled off from us, went shooting out within the air. It was a jet that they had at Edwards Air Force Base. They were just fine. At night, they'd fly over the base, and we didn't see what it was. One day, the skipper called in the office, and he introduced this man with the paddles, and he said, in everybody's way here, he said that this is an LSO, and he's going to instruct you the landing signal officer signals for landing on a carrier. He said, we're going to board a carrier in 2 weeks. So this fellow was training us to the paddles. If you did this, it mean you turn your wings up, and you did this. If you kicked, it meant you were skidding, and so on. So we learned his signals. Went aboard the aircraft carrier, the Bunker Hill. And we went aboard this in Alameda. I had 2 carrier landings on the old Ranger before we went aboard the Bunker Hill. And then out of Hawaii, we went into Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and saw all the devastation there from the Japanese attack. When we left Pearl Harbor, I had one other flight off the Bunker Hill. That was my 3rd carrier landing. Then in the 4th carrier landing, I was out in combat air patrol. Landing on an aircraft carrier was, to me, safer than taking off. Taking off, we lost planes and pilots. The reason for taking off an aircraft carrier is if there's not enough air over the deck and don't have enough flying speed, you're going in. And off Okinawa, before we got to Okinawa, we were hit Tokyo, carrier raids on Tokyo, first time raids on Tokyo after Doolittle. And then Iwo Jima, we supported the landings at Iwo Jima. Then we went to Okinawa. And off Okinawa was most of our kamikaze attacks. We had 35 kamikaze attacks, and then the next two hit us. And I was aboard, and I was down in this opposite side up front in my room. I was writing a letter home to my mother when, boom, we hit. First one hit. I went out of my stateroom, and I had helmet on and May West, and another one went off. The second one went off, knocked me down the passageway, and I went aft because I thought we were hit up forward, and I went aft, and I got back into here, and I was trying to get up, and all the flames and stuff was ahead above me. The decks, when you got up over the top of the fire, your shoes melted underneath you, and you'd slide, and you just like being on a hot skillet. Somewhere in that area, I got burned on my leg and wound up in sick bay for 4 or 5 days. This is a squadron. The pictures up above are the ones in the DVD that was made of the squadron. And I was this fellow here. All the pilots made it back except, I think we lost 3 or 4 of our regular pilots, but it seemed like replacement pilots. I'd have a replacement pilot in my stateroom, and then I wouldn't even remember his name. The next day, he was gone. And one night I woke up and the pilot on the bunk with me was writing a letter about 2 o'clock in the morning or so. I said, "Hal, what's the matter?" And he said, "I'm writing a letter to my parents." He says, "I want you to okay it without opening to read it for censure." I said, "Okay, but what is the deal here?" And he said, "I don't think I'm coming back from my strike." And sure enough, he didn't come back. He was shot down. I didn't open the letter, so I didn't see that. But we were losing pilots. I lost my wingman. I lost my air group commander. I lost the division leader of only in one time in one strike at Okinawa. Every time we made a run at the target, somebody was hit. And the Navy was dropping bombs through the clouds onto the beach area where the landings were going to be. And you had to dodge them as they were coming down. You had to watch for fire down below firing at you. You see the flashes of the guns. You fire into them, they'd stop firing. But then you had to always keep your eye in the rearview mirrors because the anti-aircraft bursts were coming up on you. You had to dodge that. You had to dodge the bombs. You had to concentrate on the fire down below. And by the time I got out of there, I was shaking so bad that my feet were bouncing on the rudders, and I was still able to fly the plane and come around for another strike, back down through this again. Boy, was I glad to get out of there. Also on off Okinawa there, I took off with napalm they were going to saturate the landing beach. We had a time scheduled to be at the on target because of the landing. They had these 2 napalm on the aircraft. We couldn't get our flaps all the way down. We only get about 20 degrees of flap. Usually we get about 50 degrees of flap. So the first plane took off. He went in the water and crashed. The napalm went off. I was over at the side of the carrier, and I had to close the canopy because the flames were coming up. Then the second one took off. He went in, a friend of mine. And then the next one, they were going to send off the third one, and he said he had engine trouble, took him down below. Next one said he had engine trouble, took him down below. The one in front of me said he had engine trouble, and the skipper there, the ship called down for the engineering officer. He said, "You get these aircraft in the air." So the engineering officer got up and talked to Wade, and Wade said, rev it up and all this. And he said, "There's nothing wrong with your engine." Wade says, "I know that, but I don't have enough power to get off." So they talked to the skipper, and pretty soon I felt the ship shaking and picking up speed then. It was a beautiful day. It was Easter Sunday. Wasn't any wind. And off he goes. And I was sitting cocked sideways so I could see down the deck. Because the Corsair, you pull it around in front of me, you can't see anything forward. So then they were yelling at me to get in position to take off. I stayed there until I saw Wade flying out in the distance. So I turned around and off I went. Got the end of the deck and I knew it wasn't going to be flying. Braced myself, thought I hit the water, and I jumped up, unbuckled, got up in the cockpit and to get out of there before the ship hit. I was still flying. I was on an air cushion, like an air hovercraft and so on. I was on an air cushion. Got back in the cockpit. The stick wasn't in use. I couldn't get enough speed to get up off of that. Closed all my cowlings and stuff to get airspeed. Finally got up off there. The engine was overheated and everything. Got to the target, dropped the 2 napalm. Both of them were hit by ship fire to shore, right underneath my plane, about 20 feet down from me. The pilot behind me had it on the gun camera film. What? I pushed the wrong button. Got into Bremerton, and then from Bremerton we went down to Goleta, south of Santa Barbara, and into a F-6F Hellcat. We were going to go back out overseas again in a Jeep carrier when Pearl Harbor happened. And that ended the war for me, thank God. Then we went to the East Coast with the Corsairs and flew off a Jeep carrier into the Atlantic. We flew in the North Atlantic and down the Caribbean. And I was living out of a suitcase because the ship would go into port and we'd fly down to a Marine Corps Air Base, Cherry Point, stay there till the ship went out again, take our suitcase, go out the ship again. So I put in for school at Quantico. Got a taste of the peace-kind Marine Corps and decided it's not for me. So I was going to get out. Well, the colonel called me into his office one day, and I came in and he said, "Lieutenant, raise your right hand." I said, "What's this for, sir?" He said, "I'm swearing you into the regular Marine Corps. You're the only pilot that's still in the reserves. Now raise your right hand." I said, "No, sir." He said, "Lieutenant, I have orders here to swear you into the Marine Corps. Now raise your right hand." I said, "No, sir." Well, he broke his pencil and said, "You get down to quarters and get out of here." And so I called headquarters and I finished the course, and then I left there, came out here. This is the crew that was aboard the Salerno Bay. And I'm in the middle there. Then I came out here to Sandpoint, the reserve squadron here at Sandpoint. And wound up back in Corsairs. And it was VMF 216 that I flew out of here. I flew out of Sandpoint for 13 years, different aircraft. This is one aircraft I flew, and story with that one was that I had a general after me because I made more money in 1 month than he did. I was ferrying this SMJ down to Pensacola, and on the way back I was riding with somebody else in a plane coming back. Well, the weather was bad. Also, there was Mardi Gras at St. Louis. We stopped to take that in. So when we got back, I had so much time away from base, and Al added up to more than the general got. I had to explain every stop, every place, why, and so on, to explain why I had so much money. And this is another one I flew out of Sandpoint on instruments. One time flying out of Sandpoint, we flew up north to Whidbey Island, made an approach there, and a thunderstorm came in. It was so bad that lightning, well, I was flying at night, lightning flashes would blind us in the cockpit, and the hail was hitting the plane. Got back to approach on Sandpoint. I remember coming in, and the ground control was Jeep radar, whatever they call it at the time, I forgot. But it said you're 50 feet high or 50 feet low, and I was bouncing back and forth. Finally got on the deck, got up to the flight, up to the hangar, and the skipper was there. He said, God, you guys are back. He said, the plane went down up there. We thought it was you. It was such a bad storm we were in. Then we out of the Corsair, went into the 216, went overseas to Korea, and I wound up in another squadron at Sandpoint called 541, and they had the Bearcat. The Bearcat was a very highly performance aircraft. It would climb faster than any jet until the F-100 series came out. It would get up to 10,000 feet faster than any of them. One time I was showing off at Sacramento, the airfield there. They had F-86s. And they were giving us, my wingman and I, a bad time about flying prop planes because they're flying F-86s. I said, well, wait, watch us when we take off. I'll show you what this will do. So on takeoff, I held the stick in my lap, held the brakes on the end of the runway, then put the throttle on, and the tail would come off the ground. The tail had to be tied down when they were checking full throttle on it. And then I'd release the brakes, and before I knew it, I was airborne. Climbed best at 135 knots. I was watching the instruments, and I was going up. I was going up so steep that I felt pressure on my back, and I looked out, and I was going up like this. I thought, sure, I was going to stall, and that'd be it, but I was able to get nose back through the horizontal and make a 360 inside the airfield, and my wingman joined up. We were at 5,000 feet. And my aunt and uncle at the flight line said the Air Force guys just couldn't believe what we were doing. We were going up so fast. Then the last airplane I flew was a Skyraider out of Sandpoint here. And that was a big engine. One thing they warned us about that was on landing, on your approach to the field, landing field, you're turning into it. If you had to take a wave off, not to put the throttle on right away, just jam the throttle on. You had to throttle up easy because it had such a big engine. It would twist that airplane. So it flipped you right over in your back. And close to the ground, that was not good. These are the aircrafts that I've flown during my time.
Well, look at all the airplanes.